want to be clear about something before I start. I'm not telling you this because I think you'll believe me. I'm telling you because last night, I found a job listing online for a place called Morrow's Wonder Emporium, and it wasn't my listing. Someone else is about to take that job. Someone is going to walk through those doors the way I did, and they deserve to know what's waiting inside. So if you've applied to work at the last toy store on Delancey Road, the one wedged between the shuttered laundromat and the empty lot where the Dairy Queen used to be, then this is for you. Please read all of it, please. I was 24 when I started at Morrow's. That was 11 months ago, and I still can't sleep with the lights off. I still can't walk past the toy aisle at Target without my hands going numb. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The reason I took the job was simple and boring, the way reasons usually are. I'd been laid off from a warehouse distribution center in April, and by late June, my savings were a memory. I was 2 months behind on rent for a studio apartment that smelled like mildew and someone else's cooking, and my landlord had graduated from passive-aggressive texts to a formal letter taped to my door. I was applying to everything: gas stations, fast food, janitorial services, anything. I must have submitted 40 applications in 2 weeks and gotten callbacks from exactly none of them. Then I found a listing on one of those smaller job boards, the kind that looks like it hasn't been updated since 2009. The post was plain, almost amateurish. Help, wanted, evening retail associate, Morrow's Wonder Emporium. Immediate start, $19 or R. No experience necessary, inquire in person. That was it. No company description, no qualifications, no perky language about joining a team. Just an address and a wage that was $5 more than anything else I'd seen. I drove out to Delancey Road on a Thursday afternoon. I almost missed it. The storefront was wide but set back from the road, partially hidden by an overgrown hedge that had swallowed most of the sidewalk. The sign above the entrance was hand-painted, faded yellow letters on a dark green background, and the display windows were cluttered with toys arranged in setups that must have been put together years ago. A plastic tea party scene with sun-bleached dolls, a model train set coated in dust, a pyramid of board game boxes with water stains creeping up the cardboard. The door chimed when I pushed it open. One of those old mechanical bells bolted above the frame, not an electronic sensor. Inside the store was bigger than it looked from the outside, stretching back in long aisles under fluorescent lights that buzzed at a frequency just below comfortable. The air smelled like old cardboard and something faintly chemical like the inside of a new shower curtain. It was the kind of smell that isn't unpleasant. Exactly, but makes you aware that you're breathing. The aisles were tall, maybe 8 feet, stacked with toys in a way that felt more like storage than display. Stuffed animals crammed next to remote control cars, jigsaw puzzles stacked on top of chemistry sets. There was no logic to the organization that I could see. And it was quiet. Not just empty store quiet, but the kind of quiet where you become aware of the sound of your own clothes rustling when you move. I found the owner near the back, behind a wooden counter that looked like it belonged in a hardware store. He was sitting on a stool, reading a paperback, and he didn't look up until I was standing directly in front of him. "Mr. Morrow?" I asked. He set the book down. He was older than I expected, mid-70s at least, with thin white hair, and the kind of deeply lined face that made it hard to tell if he was tired or just permanently resigned. His eyes were pale blue, almost colorless, and they studied me with an expression I couldn't read. "You're here about the position," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. I saw the listing online." He looked at me for another long moment, then reached below the counter and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Not an application, just a blank piece of paper with a few lines written on it in pen. He slid it across the counter. "Write your name, phone number, and the date you can start." "Don't you want to? I mean, don't you have an interview process, or?" "No," he said simply. "Can you work evenings, 5 to close?" "What time is close?" "Midnight." I hesitated. Midnight was late, but the pay was good, and the alternative was an eviction notice. "Yeah," I said. "I can do that." "Good, start tomorrow." That was the entire hiring process. No background check, no references, no tax forms. Those came later, stuffed into a manila envelope he handed me on my way out. I remember sitting in my car afterward, engine running, staring at the storefront and trying to figure out why I felt uneasy. It was just a toy store. An old, cluttered, slightly sad toy store in a part of town that had been slowly dying for years. There was nothing wrong with it. That's what I told myself. I showed up the next evening at 10 to 5. The sun was still high enough to wash the parking lot in that golden late afternoon light, but the inside of the store was exactly as dim as it had been the day before. Those fluorescents didn't care what time it was. Mr. Morrow was at the counter again. Same stool, different paperback. He nodded when I walked in and gestured toward the back of the store. "Delia's in the stock room. She'll show you the ropes. I'm leaving at 6. You're not staying for my first shift?" "Delia knows the store better than I do at this point," he said, and there was something in the way he said it, a heaviness or maybe an avoidance that I didn't understand until much later. I found Delia in the stock room, which was exactly as cluttered and disorganized as the sales floor. She was a small woman, maybe 50, with short gray hair and the kind of nervous energy that made her seem like she was always about to say something she decided against. She was packing a cardboard box with personal items, a coffee mug, a sweater, a small framed photo I couldn't see clearly. "You're the new one," she said, not looking up. "Yeah, I don't need your name," she said. And it wasn't rude exactly, but it landed like a door closing. "I need you to listen. I'm leaving tonight and I'm not coming back. And there are things you need to know about this place that Harold isn't going to tell you." Harold, I assumed, was Mr. Morrow. She finally looked at me. Her eyes were brown and very steady, but the skin around them was drawn tight, the way it gets when someone hasn't been sleeping well for a long time. "How much did he tell you about the job?" "Just the hours, 5 to midnight." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Of course. Okay, sit down." There was nowhere to sit in the stockroom, so I leaned against a shelf of boxed dolls and waited. "The store is simple during the day," she said. "Customers come in, they buy things, you ring them up. It's slow. Most days, you'll get maybe 10-15 people, and half of them are just browsing. The register is straightforward, the pricing stickers are on everything. Harold handles the books and the ordering. Your job is to be on the floor, keep things tidy, and manage the register." "Okay, that's the normal part. Now, here's the rest." She stopped packing her box and turned to face me fully. "I'm going to give you 6 warnings. I need you to take them seriously. I know how they're going to sound, and I know you're going to think I'm crazy or messing with you or that this is some kind of hazing thing. It isn't. Every person who's worked the evening shift here has gotten these warnings, and the ones who listened are the ones who walked out at the end of their shifts. The ones who didn't," she trailed off and her jaw tightened. "Just listen." I nodded, more out of obligation than belief. She was right. I did think it was some kind of hazing ritual, a way for the outgoing employee to scare the new hire. I'd worked enough jobs to know people got bored and weird in quiet workplaces. Delia held up one finger. "First, if a child comes into the store alone after dark, do not help them find what they're looking for. Tell them we're closing. Walk them to the exit. Don't let them browse. And this is important, don't look at what they're reaching for on the shelves." She held up a second finger. "Second, aisle 7 is the music box aisle. After sundown, it stays roped off. There's a velvet rope on a stand at the end of the aisle. You'll see it. If you hear music coming from that direction, go to the store's speaker system behind the register and turn up the volume. Play anything. It doesn't matter what. Just drown it out. Do not go to aisle 7 to investigate." A third finger. "Third, at some point during your shift, you're going to walk past a shelf and see a toy you recognize. Not just a type of toy, a specific one. One that you owned when you were little. You'll know it because of the way it makes you feel like a hook in your stomach, like being homesick. Don't touch it. Don't pick it up. Walk away from that aisle and don't go back to it for the rest of the night. Fourth, there's a door at the very back of the stockroom past the loading dock. It leads to a second storage area. That door has a padlock on it, and the padlock stays on. If you hear knocking coming from behind that door, and you will, probably around 10 or 11, knock back on it twice. Only twice, then walk away. Don't press your ear to it. Don't try to listen to what's on the other side. 5th, if the overhead lights flicker 3 times in a row and you smell something sweet, like birthday cake frosting or cotton candy or those sugar wax bottles we used to get as kids, go to the front counter immediately. Stand behind the register and stay there, don't move, and don't look up at the ceiling. Keep your eyes on the counter, on your hands, on the floor, anywhere but up. Wait until the smell goes away completely before you move. She paused before the 6th, and I noticed her hand was trembling slightly. She pressed it flat against the top of the box she'd been packing. Last one. When you close up at midnight, you need to walk the floor and count the display mannequins. You've seen them, the child-sized ones Harold uses to model the costumes and dress-up kits. There are 4 of them on the sales floor. 1 by the front window, 1 at the end of aisle 3, 1 at the end of aisle 10, 1 by the back wall near the restroom hallway. 4. When you do your closing walk, count them. If there are 4, lock up and leave. If you count 5, she swallowed. If you count 5, don't lock up. Don't finish your closing routine. Leave the store immediately. Go to your car and drive away. Don't look in the rearview mirror until you've turned off Delancey Road. She picked up her box and held it against her chest like a shield. That's all 6. Do you have questions? I had about 100, but the one that came out was the obvious one. Why? What happens if you break the rules? Delia looked at me, and for a moment, the nervous energy drained out of her entirely, replaced by something flat and exhausted. There was a girl who worked here before me. Her name was Colette. She was 19. She didn't listen to the 3rd warning, the one about the toy. She found a stuffed rabbit on a shelf in aisle 5 that she said looked exactly like one she'd had as a toddler. She picked it up. She thought it was a coincidence, thought it was funny. Delia's voice was steady but thin, like a wire pulled tight. She took it to the break room and set it on the table. By the end of her shift, she said she couldn't remember what her childhood bedroom had looked like. The next day, she couldn't remember her mother's first name. The day after that, she didn't come to work. Harold found her apartment empty. Not moved out empty. Empty like no one had ever lived there. The landlord had no record of a tenant. I looked her up online, on social media, everywhere, nothing, no Colette Brashear anywhere. It's like she was never born. She let that sit between us for a moment. I have to go, she said quietly. The sun's going down, and she left. I heard the bell above the front door chime, and then I was alone in the stock room surrounded by towers of box toys, holding a set of instructions that sounded like a prank but had been delivered with the sincerity of a last confession. Mr. Morrow left 30 minutes later without ceremony. He put on his coat, tucked his paperback into his pocket, and paused at the front door. Delia told you the warnings? She did. He nodded slowly. Good. And then, almost as an afterthought, the store has been in my family for 61 years. It stayed open through recessions and floods and that fire in '94 that took out half the block. There's a reason it's still here. There's a reason it can't close. He looked at me with those pale, almost translucent eyes. Do your job. Follow the warnings. You'll be fine. The bell chimed. He was gone. I was alone. For the first hour, nothing happened. I familiarized myself with the register, which was ancient but functional. I walked the aisles, trying to make sense of the inventory. Aisle 1 was board games and puzzles. Aisle 2 was action figures. 3 was dolls. 4 was outdoor toys. Balls, frisbees, jump ropes. 5 was stuffed animals. 6 was building sets and model kits. And then aisle 7, the music box aisle, which I could see from the end of aisle 6. It was roped off, just like Delia had said, with a faded velvet rope strung between 2 brass stands. Behind the rope, the aisle looked like every other aisle. Shelves stacked with boxes. Except these boxes were smaller, ornate, and even from a distance I could see the glint of metal latches and painted wood. Music boxes and wind-up toys. Dozens and dozens of them, arranged neatly in a way that nothing else in the store was. I moved on. Aisle 8 was arts and crafts. 9 was baby toys. 10 was costumes and dress-up. I found the mannequins where Delia said they'd be. 4 child-sized figures made of that smooth, featureless white plastic, each dressed in different costume sets from the store's inventory. A pirate near the front window, a princess at the end of aisle 3, an astronaut at the end of aisle 10, and a clown by the back wall. They were the kind of mannequins that didn't have faces, just smooth, egg-shaped heads with no features at all. And under the fluorescence, their surfaces had a faintly yellowish tint like old teeth. I didn't like them. Nobody likes mannequins, I think. But these were worse because they were child-sized and because their blank faces seemed to tilt in your direction regardless of where you stood. I told myself it was a trick of the lighting. A few customers came in during the first 2 hours, a woman buying a birthday gift for her nephew, an older man looking for a specific board game he remembered from the 70s, which incredibly the store actually had a teenager who wandered the aisles for 20 minutes without buying anything and left. Normal people, normal transactions. I started to relax. The store was weird and old and poorly lit, but it was still just a store. The sun went down around 8:45. I know because I felt it. Not saw it, felt it, like a change in air pressure, like the building settled differently on its foundation once the daylight was gone. The fluorescence didn't change, but somehow the spaces between the aisles seemed deeper, the shadows at the far ends of the rows more solid. The windows at the front of the store went black, and instead of showing the parking lot, they just reflected the store's interior back at itself, which made it look like there were 2 stores, one real and one reversed, and I was standing at the seam between them. I went to aisle 7 and checked the rope. It was still in place. Behind it, the music boxes sat silent and motionless on their shelves. I turned away and went back to the register. At 9:15, I heard the bell above the front door. I looked up and saw a boy standing just inside the entrance. He was maybe 7 or 8, wearing a red t-shirt and jeans, and he was alone. No parent in the parking lot, no car pulling away, just a child, standing in the doorway of a toy store at 9:15 on a Friday night, looking at me with an expression that I initially read as shyness, but as the seconds stretched, began to feel like something else, something patient. My first thought was concern. A kid that age shouldn't be out alone after dark. My second thought was Delia's first warning, and a cold thread of unease pulled tight in my chest. "Hey buddy," I said, keeping my voice light. "We're actually about to close up. Is your mom or dad outside?" The boy didn't answer right away. He took a step into the store, and the door swung shut behind him with the bell chiming once, a sound that seemed louder than it should have been. "I'm looking for something," he said. His voice was ordinary, a kid's voice, but there was a flatness to it, a lack of the fidgety energy you'd expect from a child in a toy store. He wasn't looking around. He wasn't excited. He was looking at me. "I'm sorry, we're closing," I said again, and I stepped out from behind the counter. "Let me walk you out. Are your parents nearby?" "I know what I want," he said. And he turned toward aisle 5, the stuffed animal aisle, and started walking. "Don't let them browse, and don't look at what they're reaching for on the shelves." Hey, stop. We're closed." I moved quickly, putting myself between him and the aisle entrance. I didn't look down the aisle. I kept my eyes on the boy. Up close, he looked normal. Freckles, a scab on one knee, sneakers with the laces untied, but his eyes were wrong. Not in color or shape, in depth. They were flat, like painted eyes, like the surface of a photograph. There was no light reflected in them. "You need to leave," I said, and I heard the tremor in my own voice, and hated it. "Come on, I'll walk you out." The boy stared at me, then he smiled, and the smile was perfect. The right muscles, the right crinkle around the eyes, but it didn't reach those flat, depthless pupils. "Okay," he said softly. I walked him to the front door. I held it open. He stepped through onto the sidewalk, and without turning around, he said, "I'll come back when you're not watching." I let the door close. I locked it. Delia hadn't said anything about locking the front door early, and I didn't care. I stood at the register with my hands flat on the counter and waited for my heartbeat to slow down. It didn't. At 20 minutes to 10, I was restocking a shelf in aisle 2. More to keep busy than because it needed doing. When I turned the corner into aisle 5 and stopped, there was a toy on the middle shelf that hadn't been there before. I was sure of it because I'd walked this aisle during my initial tour and I would have noticed it. It was a stuffed dog, about 10 inches tall, made of brown corduroy with a cream-colored belly and floppy ears. Its left ear had a small tear near the base, clumsily repaired with green thread. I knew that dog. I knew it the way you know your own reflection, instantly and without thought. His name was Captain, and he'd been mine from the time I was 3 until I was 9. When my family moved from our house in Pennsburg to an apartment that was half the size, and my mother made me throw away a garbage bag full of old toys. Captain had been in that bag. I'd cried about it for 2 days, and then, the way kids do, I'd mostly forgotten, but I hadn't entirely forgotten, because seeing him on that shelf was like a key turning in a lock I didn't know I had. The feeling Delia had described, a hook in my stomach like being homesick, was exactly right. My hand was already reaching for him before I caught myself. I pulled my hand back. I took a step away. Captain sat on the shelf with his black button eyes and his green threaded ear, and looked like exactly what he was, a piece of my childhood that had no business being in this store. I thought about Colette Brashear, who had picked up the stuffed rabbit who had stopped existing. I turned and walked out of aisle 5. I did not go back. But here's what Delia hadn't prepared me for: the pull for the next hour. As I paced the front of the store and pretended to organize the impulse buy bins near the register, I could feel that toy, not physically, not like a magnet or a force, but like an awareness, the way you can feel someone watching you from across a room. I knew exactly where Captain was. 3rd shelf, middle of aisle 5, slightly to the left. I knew that if I went to him and picked him up, the terrible gnawing homesickness in my chest would ease. I knew it the way you know that scratching a mosquito bite will feel good even though it makes things worse. I stayed at the register. I gripped the counter until my knuckles ached. And slowly, not all at once, the pull diminished to something manageable. It didn't disappear. It just became background noise. Like tinnitus, at 10:30 I heard music. It was faint at first, so faint I thought I was imagining it. A delicate tinkling melody, the kind that plays when you open the lid of a jewelry box. It was coming from the direction of aisle 7. I could hear it even over the low hum of the fluorescents, each note precise and clear, playing a tune that was almost familiar but not quite, like a lullaby translated into the wrong key. I went to the speaker system behind the register. It was an old PA setup with a radio tuner and an auxiliary input. I turned on the radio and spun the dial until I hit a station, classic rock, some Springsteen song, and cranked the volume until it filled the store, rattling the lighter boxes on the shelves. The music from aisle 7 vanished under the sound, or stopped, or both. I couldn't tell, and I didn't want to find out. I left the radio on. Springsteen gave way to Fleetwood Mac, then Tom Petty, then a commercial for a car dealership that somehow felt more grounding than any of the music. Normal sounds, human sounds, I let them wash over me. But even with the radio playing, I couldn't stop myself from glancing toward the far end of the store, where aisle 7 began. The velvet rope was still in place. The aisle beyond it was dim. Was it always that dim? And I could see the rows of music boxes on their shelves, each one closed, each one still. None of them should have been playing. They were wind-up mechanisms and they needed to be wound. They didn't play by themselves, except one had. At 10:52, I smelled birthday cake. It wasn't subtle. It hit me like walking into a bakery. A thick, sweet, overwhelming wave of vanilla frosting and warm cake, and that specific sugary smell of candles that have just been blown out. It came from everywhere and nowhere, filling the store in a way that made the air itself feel heavy and syrupy. The lights flickered. Once, twice, 3 times. I was behind the counter before the 3rd flicker ended. I don't remember moving. I was just there, hands on the register, eyes fixed on the countertop, the grain of the wood, the scratches and coffee ring stains, a ballpoint pen with the cap chewed. These are the things I studied while the smell of birthday cake intensified until it was so sweet it was almost nauseating, until it stopped smelling like cake and started smelling like something using the scent of cake to mask something else. Something organic and humid and wrong. Don't look up at the ceiling. I didn't look up, but I could hear something above me. Not footsteps, nothing that defined or recognizable. More like a shifting the way a large animal shifts its weight. A slow, heavy redistribution of mass across the ceiling tiles. The tiles themselves creaked faintly. Hairline fractures in the sound that suggested the thing above me was testing how much weight they could bear. Droplets of something landed on the counter beside my right hand. I didn't look at them. I stared at the pen, at its chewed cap, at the tiny teeth marks pressed into the blue plastic, and I cataloged them in agonizing detail because the alternative was looking up. The shifting moved slowly from above the counter toward the back of the store, and the smell faded with it, thinning from overwhelming to strong to faint to a lingering trace of sugar in the air, and then it was gone. The lights steadied. The radio was still playing, dire straits now, and the store settled back into its buzzing, fluorescent normalcy as if nothing had happened. I looked at the counter. The droplets beside my hand were small and slightly yellowish like diluted honey. I wiped them away with a paper towel, without examining them closely, and threw the paper towel in the trash. Then I stood behind the counter for another 10 minutes, breathing slowly, waiting for my legs to stop shaking. At 11:20, the knocking started. I was in the stockroom getting a bottle of water from the mini fridge Delia had left behind. The stockroom was a cluttered, windowless space lit by a single fluorescent bar that was even older than the ones on the sales floor, and it cast everything in a slightly greenish tint. The shelves were stacked with overstock, boxes of toys that hadn't made it to the floor yet, and at the very back, past the loading dock door, was the second door. It was heavy, industrial, the kind you'd see in a warehouse or a school basement, and it had a padlock on it the size of my fist. The door was painted gray, but the paint was peeling in places, and underneath it was a different color. Something dark that might have been red or might have been rust. There was no window in it, no mail slot, no gap at the bottom. It was sealed tight. The knocking came from behind it. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, deliberate, not frantic, not pounding. Just 3 calm, patient knocks like someone politely asking to be let in. I set down the water bottle. I walked to the door. Up close, I could see that the padlock was old but solid, and the hasp it was threaded through was bolted into the doorframe with bolts that were thicker than my thumb. Whatever was on the other side of this door, someone had gone to considerable effort to keep it there. The 3 knocks came again. Same tempo, same calm patience. I raised my fist. I knocked twice on the door. The sound was flat and dead, the way a knock sounds on solid metal, and it hurt my knuckles. I stepped back for a moment. Nothing happened. Then from behind the door, I heard something that I've spent 11 months trying to convince myself I didn't hear. It was a voice, or something shaped like a voice, the way a mannequin is shaped like a person, and it said 2 words in a tone that was perfectly conversational, as if we were standing on opposite sides of a kitchen counter instead of a padlocked industrial door. Thank you. I walked away. I left the stockroom. I went to the sales floor and stood under the fluorescents and the radio and the normal, sane geometry of retail shelving, and I did not go back to the stockroom for the rest of the night. The last 40 minutes of my shift were the worst, and not because anything dramatic happened. It was the waiting. I knew what was coming at midnight. The closing walk, the mannequin count. I tried to prepare myself. I told myself it would be fine. 4 mannequins. I'd seen them during my initial tour. Pirate by the window, princess at the end of aisle 3, astronaut at the end of aisle 10, clown by the back wall. 4. Just 4. I would walk the floor, count them, lock up, and leave. At midnight, I turned off the radio. The silence that followed was enormous, a physical thing that pressed against my eardrums. I picked up the store keys from the hook behind the register and stepped out onto the sales floor. The pirate was by the front window. I could see it from the register, standing in its little tableau with a plastic sword and a felt hat, its blank white face angled toward the glass. 1. I walked down the main aisle, my footsteps absurdly loud on the linoleum. At the end of aisle 3, the princess mannequin stood in a pink tulle dress and a plastic tiara, hands posed as if holding an invisible bouquet. 2. I kept walking. The store felt longer than it had during the day, the aisles stretching in my peripheral vision like corridors in a dream. At the end of aisle 10, the astronaut mannequin stood in a silver jumpsuit and a plastic helmet. Its blank face was pointed directly down the aisle, and for a disorienting moment, I felt like it was watching me approach. 3. I turned toward the back wall. The hallway to the restrooms was a short, narrow passage between the last shelf unit and the stockroom door. The clown mannequin should have been standing at the entrance to that hallway. It was a red wig, white ruffled collar, oversized polka dot jumpsuit, blank face, four mannequins. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. 4, just 4. I almost laughed. The warnings were real. The boy, the toy, the music, the smell, the knocking. But this last one at least had come up clean. I turned to walk back to the front of the store. And then at the far end of aisle 6, in my peripheral vision, I saw the 5th. I didn't look at it directly. Some instinct, some animal reflex, buried deeper than conscious thought, stopped my head from turning. But I saw it in that blurred edge of vision the way you see a spider on the wall. Complete and immediate and undeniable, a child-sized figure standing at the end of an aisle where no mannequin had been before. It was white. The same smooth plastic white as the others, but it wasn't dressed in a costume. It was bare, and its head was turned toward me. If you count 5, don't lock up. Leave the store immediately. I walked to the front door. I didn't run. Some part of me understood, with a clarity that felt borrowed rather than earned, that running would be wrong. That running would change something about the dynamic between me and the thing in aisle 6, would turn this from a departure into a chase. So I walked, left foot, right foot, steady, and even past the register, past the impulse bins. I walked to my car, got in, started the engine, and drove out of the parking lot. I did not look in the rearview mirror until I'd turned off Delancey Road. When I finally did look, there was nothing behind me but dark road and streetlights. But the streetlight nearest to the toy store's parking lot was out, and in that pocket of darkness, I couldn't be certain there wasn't a shape standing at the edge of the lot, pale and featureless and child-sized, watching me leave. I went home. I locked my apartment door, then checked the lock, then checked it again. I sat on my bed with every light on and stared at the wall until the sun came up. When my phone buzzed at 7 in the morning, I almost threw it across the room. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. Good work on your first shift. Same time tonight, tomorrow. I didn't go back. I want to be clear about that. I did not go back. I texted back that I quit, and I waited for a response and none came. Not that day. Not the next day. Not ever. Mr. Morrow didn't argue, didn't try to convince me, didn't even acknowledge the message, but that wasn't the end of it. 3 days after my shift, I was in my apartment unpacking a box I'd never finished dealing with from my last move. Inside it, underneath some old textbooks and a broken phone charger, I found Captain, the stuffed corduroy dog with the cream belly and the floppy ears and the green thread stitching his left ear together. He was in my apartment, in a box I had sealed with packing tape 6 months ago. I didn't touch him. I closed the box and taped it shut and put it in the dumpster behind my building. The next morning, the box was back in my apartment, in the same corner, the tape undisturbed, as if I'd never moved it. I threw it away 4 more times. It came back 4 more times. On the 5th morning, I opened the box and Captain was sitting on top of the textbooks in a slightly different position than before. And I realized with a slow, freezing horror that he was closer to the top each time, working his way up, working his way out. I left the apartment that afternoon. I moved to my cousin's place 2 towns over, left most of my stuff behind, and I haven't been back. The landlord sent me an angry email about breaking the lease, and I paid the fee and didn't explain why. What was I going to say? I tried to research Morrow's Wonder Emporium. The store has almost no online presence, no website, no Yelp reviews, no Google Maps listing with photos or ratings. I found a brief mention in a 2004 local newspaper article about small businesses surviving the big box era, and a single sentence in a 2011 Chamber of Commerce report listing it as an active business on Delancey Road. That's it. 61 years of operation and almost no footprint. as if the world had agreed not to notice it. I drove past Delancey Road once, about 2 months after I quit. I didn't stop. I slowed down enough to see the storefront, the faded sign, the cluttered window displays. The store was open, the lights were on, and standing behind the front window, visible between the sun-bleached dolls and the dusty train set, was a figure, child-sized, smooth, white, featureless, standing perfectly still. It hadn't been in the window display before. It was the fifth mannequin, and it was positioned facing the street, as if looking out, as if waiting. I drove away and haven't been back to that side of town. But here's the thing that made me write this. Here's the reason I'm telling you all of this now, tonight at 2 in the morning with my cousin's kitchen light on, and my hands shaking so badly I keep hitting the wrong keys. Last night, I was scrolling through job listings. I've been looking for work again, carefully this time, and I found a post on the same obscure job board where I had originally found the Morrow's listing. Same plain text, same amateurish formatting. Help wanted, evening retail associate, Morrow's Wonder Emporium, immediate start, $19 per hour. No experience necessary, inquire in person. Someone is going to see that listing. Someone who's desperate, the way I was desperate, is going to drive out to Delancey Road and walk through that door and sit across from Harold Morrow and write their name on a piece of paper. And when 5 o'clock comes, they're going to be alone in that store with the fluorescent lights and the velvet rope and the padlocked door and the things that move in the ceiling. They deserve to know the warnings, all 6. But here's what I keep circling back to. The thing I can't stop thinking about. Delia gave me 6 warnings, and every single one of them came true during my shift. Everyone, almost as if the store was performing for me, testing me, showing me each danger in order, one by one, like a tutorial. And the thing behind the padlocked door said thank you when I knocked twice. Why did it say thank you? I've thought about this for 11 months. I've thought about the fact that the knocking protocol, knock twice, walk away, isn't a defense. Delia described the other warnings as protective. Don't help the child rope off aisle 7. Don't touch the toy. Stay at the counter, leave if there are 5. Those are protections, walls, ways to keep yourself safe. But knocking back isn't a wall. Knocking back is a response. It's a communication. It's you telling whatever is behind that door that you're there, that you're listening, that you're participating. What if the 4th warning isn't protecting you from the thing behind the door? What if the 4th warning is something the thing behind the door wants you to do? What if all 6 warnings are its rules, not yours? I keep thinking about Harold Morrow and his pale eyes and the way he said, "There's a reason it can't close." I keep thinking about 61 years of evening shift employees, each one receiving the warnings from the last one to leave. A chain of frightened people passing the instructions down like a prayer to a god they don't understand. And I keep thinking about the 5th mannequin in the window, facing the street, watching traffic, waiting for the next car to slow down and pull into the lot. I don't know what the store is. I don't know what lives in the ceiling or behind the padlocked door, or what crawls into the shape of a child and walks through the front entrance with flat, painted eyes. I don't know why the store needs us, why it can't just exist on its own, why it requires a person behind the register every night from 5 to midnight, like a ritual, like a feeding schedule. But I know one thing, if you took that job, if you're reading this on your phone in the parking lot of Morrow's Wonder Emporium, 10 minutes before your first shift, wondering whether the old woman or the nervous man or whoever warned you was telling the truth, listen to me, follow the 6 warnings. All of them. Don't deviate, don't improvise, don't try to be brave. And when you close up and count the mannequins and find 4, only 4, and you drive home and crawl into bed and tell yourself it's over, that you survived, that the worst is behind you, check the corners of your room. Count the shapes in the dark, make sure they're only the ones that belong to you, because there was nothing in my apartment when I got home after that first shift. I'm certain of that. I checked every room, every closet, every shadow. There was nothing there. But the next morning, in the corner of my bedroom where I keep a coat rack and an old floor lamp, there was a shape I didn't recognize. It was the size of a child. It was pale. And when I turned on the light, it was just the coat rack and the lamp, casting overlapping shadows in a way they'd never done before, arranged at an angle I hadn't left them in. Just the coat rack and the lamp, I'm sure of it. Almost.